After climbing to the top of the corporate ladder, she finally made love a priority.
Whatever she was missing, he was able to fulfill it. They were attached at the hip. Really, the only time they separated was when both of them went to work.
But a fateful December night will tear them apart forever.
Jay, spring up some crime scene tape.
There was blood all around her, blood on the walls.
She has been dead for quite some time.
When the men closest to her point the finger at each other, who's telling the truth?
He's a stalker. I really don't trust him at all.
This guy is like real jealous, controlling.
He was blackmailing her and extorting her for money.
She gave him everything, money, bought a car for him, pays for everything.
Get out! Before I call the cops.
We got to the point where I just couldn't be there.
He was a very violent person, the definition of dangerous.
December 2019. With only days until Christmas, residents in West Palm Beach, Florida are preparing for the holiday season.
This particular area of Florida is surrounded by marinas, yachts, and it's right next door to Palm Beach County, which is home to a lot of American billionaires.
It's known as a very upscale, safe area.
But on the evening of December 16th, as most residents are fast asleep, the quiet tranquility is shattered after the clock strikes midnight.
The department received a 911 call from an individual they identified as Ronald Gamble.
West Palm PD, what's your emergency?
Come quick, my girlfriend needs help. Please.
He had come home from being away for the weekend and found a bloody scene.
He finds his girlfriend, 52-year-old Rochelle Demings, laying in a pool of her own blood.
Oh my God, Rochelle, she's not breathing.
West Palm Beach police were immediately dispatched to the scene.
Come on outside for me, brother. Okay. You didn't touch her at all. Have you moved her at all? You checked her or anything? Okay. Is anybody else in the home? No. Okay.
When the officer looks inside the door, he is taken aback by what he sees.
Oh.
The officer can tell there's no use trying CPR.
It looks like Rochelle has been dead for quite some time.
Jay, spring up some crime scene tape.
At that point, the officer radios down to homicide detectives to start an investigation.
All right, we got the medics. They're going to come and check on her, but it doesn't look good, but...
"52-year-old mother of two, Rochelle Demings, was as accomplished as they come."
She had 2 bachelor's degrees, 2 associate's degrees. She also went on to get her master's degree.
She was a bright light, a walking smile and inspiration to anyone that she crossed paths with.
She was a very accomplished federal employee with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs.
She was the chief of HIMSS at the West Palm Beach VA. HIMSS is Health Information Management Service.
Her employees describe her as someone who was always willing to help, always willing to teach them how to elevate their career as well.
Even though she was a chief, she would be alongside of us working every day if we got behind. She was down in the trenches with us.
But despite the success she built, something was still missing.
Her kids were grown, and after 20 years of marriage, she divorced their father. So she was missing companionship, she was missing romance.
Although Rochelle was very well respected in her industry, she got lonely.
So Rochelle decided to take action.
She went online, and it didn't take long until she was matched with Ronald Gamble.
Ronald wasn't as esteemed or decorated as Rochelle. However, he did work different temp agency jobs.
On their first date, sparks flew.
He seemed to be a really nice guy, and he was very supportive of all of the things that Rochelle had going on in her life.
You know, you are really something else.
I was just glad I was able to make you smile, you know.
He was very charming. He made Rochelle laugh. He was able to make Rochelle feel like that whatever piece she was missing, he was able to fulfill it.
And after that first date, the relationship moved fast.
Ronald was constantly at Rochelle's house. They were tied together at the hip.
He moved in with her pretty quickly.
After 3 years of dating, they actually upgraded their lifestyle and they moved into a beautiful, amazing new condo in West Palm Beach.
But after the couple had spent only a few weeks in their new home, detectives are there to begin a homicide investigation.
We were confronted with Miss Demings, who's laying on the floor right in the breezeway or the foyer area of this apartment. There's a large quantity of blood on the ground, and she's obviously deceased.
It was absolutely a terrible scene.
It's clear to police that whatever happened in that apartment, Rochelle died a violent death.
The only way that you could get around her was to jump over her. So it was a very difficult scene to work because all of the blood.
It was really hard for the police to find out the source of where her blood was coming from, but it did appear as though the blood was coming from her head.
And from the looks of it, Rochelle's been dead for a few days.
There was lots of blood. It was dark blood, which looked like it had been sitting there for a while. Some looked like it was dried because of the length of time that it had been there.
There was actually some pieces of mail that were in very close proximity to her body at the time.
They wonder if she was holding the letters when she was attacked and dropped them.
But aside from the gory scene in the entryway, nothing in the apartment seems amiss.
Nothing appeared to be stolen.
The door wasn't broken, so it really didn't seem like somebody entered that shouldn't be there.
Her boyfriend's the one that found her?
Yes, he's been very cooperative so far.
Okay.
Detectives are eager to speak with Ronald themselves to learn more.
They're very curious to see if he knew about who would be able to cause this kind of harm to Rochelle.
Or did he have something to do with it?
After years of prioritizing her successful career, 52-year-old Rochelle Demings had found love at long last.
She fell head over heels in love with a man named Ronald Gamble. The two had just moved into a place together in West Palm Beach.
They wanted to spend as much time as they could together.
But now, the couple's new condo is a crime scene.
Rochelle was located on the floor of the condo with some type of head injury that produced a lot of blood.
As word spreads to Rochelle's friends, family, and co-workers, they're heartbroken.
So I get to work, and people were emotional and everything. They grab me, and they tell me that Rochelle is dead. My whole professional world had collapsed. Like, what the F you mean she dead? So, didn't make it through the day at all. Another person ended up taking me home.
Rochelle's boyfriend, Ronald Gamble, also seems shaken up.
Ronald was the one that called 911 after he returned to the condo and found Rochelle.
Detectives are very curious to see if he knew about who would be able to cause this kind of harm to Rochelle.
Or did he have something to do with it?
Detectives bring Ronald back to the station for an official statement.
He had no problem speaking to us at all. He's very talkative. He's very open about things.
How long have you two been together?
I would say 3 years now.
He explained that he and Miss Demings have been dating for a few years and that they had just moved to this apartment.
But Ronald says there's one person who had recently come between them. Rochelle's 27-year-old son, Dan.
They had a wonderful relationship up until the son came from Ohio.
What happened was, okay, I lived with her for a while, and then all of a sudden, her son comes out of nowhere. Her son is a stalker.
When detectives ask Ronald to elaborate, he starts at the beginning.
When Dan decided to move from Cleveland, Ohio to Florida, he had nowhere else to go. So Rochelle, being the mother that she is, she allowed Dan to come home to her home. But Ronald was very reluctant against that.
After Dan moved in, Ronald says the entire dynamic between him and Rochelle shifted.
He said they had started having disagreements and arguing.
He's an adult, Rochelle. He needs to grow up and get his own place.
You just don't understand. That is my only son.
We've never had any trouble before he came, never. He's always involved in our life. Like, he won't just get out of our lives.
And it became an issue that she gave him everything, money, bought a car for him, pays for his phone bill, pays for everything.
Ronald got fed up. He made the statement that if Dan wasn't going to pay bills, then Dan had to get out. Dan did not like that.
Do it, get out. Hey, what's going on in here?
You're 27. She doesn't owe you. I keep telling him that. Every time he tries, I say, bro, get out. Your mom don't owe you, bro. Get around us. You're grown.
Then Ronald says things took a turn for the worst.
He bust me in the head with a hot sauce bottle.
Get out! Before I call the cops.
And I called the police out. And I told them, hey man, the guy that assaulted me.
Ronald ended up pressing charges and Dan was arrested. He was charged with aggravated battery and taken to jail.
But Ronald claims Dan's volatile behavior continued.
A few weeks later, Ronald and Rochelle woke up to the sound of glass smashing. When they went to see what it was, or who it was Dan.
What the hell are you doing?
What are you doing?
He punched through their window, trying to get in.
I don't know why he did it, but he did it and cut his arm all up. I said, babe, you got to remove him from our lives. We can't live like this. You're a professional, I work. He doesn't want to do nothing with his life.
Get out before I call the cops.
Once again, Ronald had Dan arrested.
So it's been month after month, we've had the police over there on him within a year about at least 20 or 30 times. I really don't trust him at all.
And Ronald says the apartment complex also became fed up with the drama.
Because of the issues that the son and he were having and the trouble that it was causing, they had asked them to leave.
They were evicted from their apartment.
Ronald felt like Dan was ruining what he had with Rochelle, so that led him to file a restraining order against Dan.
Within a month, the couple had found a new place to live. And with Dan out of the picture, Ronald says it felt like a new beginning.
They were starting new, and her son would not know where they lived.
But Ronald says he believes Dan found them once again.
He's obsessed with his mom. And I don't know, I've seen some other weird things I don't want to say. Makes me think, other things are going on too.
Say it. What are you going to say?
Nothing could prepare them for what came out of Ronald's mouth next.
He talks about some wild accusations.
That's nasty. No, that's not who she was as a person.
Detectives in West Palm Beach are investigating the murder of 52-year-old Rochelle Demings.
She was found in a pool of blood by her boyfriend, Ronald Gamble. It was clear she had been brutally attacked.
And now Ronald is raising suspicion about Rochelle's own son.
He claims that Dan was jealous of his relationship with Rochelle.
According to Ronald, Dan had been violent towards them in the past, and they even had to file a restraining order against him.
He's obsessed with his mom. And I don't know, I've seen some other weird things I don't want to say. Makes me think, other things are going on too.
Say it. What are you going to say?
He believed that Rochelle and Dan didn't have a typical mother-son relationship.
He talks about some wild accusations about the possibility that Miss Demings and her son were engaged in sexual activity.
I think they sleep together a whole lot of times.
He would say that she would be on the phone with him, and he believed that they were having phone sex or something to that extent.
Anybody that stays on the phone with their son all the time, there's got to be something else going on.
It's a shocking claim, and one detectives take with a grain of salt.
That's not Rochelle. That's nasty. No. That's not who she was as a person. That's not who she was as a mother.
There's absolutely no proof, none. But Ronald Gamble felt so strongly that this woman should not be taking this good care of her adult son.
Ronald says 3 days ago he found evidence that Rochelle was still taking care of Dan, even after they moved into their new condo to get away from him.
He was going through the mail on Friday the 13th.
He found mail addressed to Dan, and that set him off. He said there was no reason why Dan's mail should be coming to that address. Dan wasn't supposed to even know the address.
He will not leave us alone. And when I seen that mail with his name on it, and so now once I see that, I said, he must have a key here. So now I'm heated.
He confronted Rochelle about what he discovered.
What's this going in our mail?
I don't know.
He even asked Rochelle if she had planned on giving a key to Dan to their new condo.
Tell me the truth. Did you give him a key?
What? No.
She kind of gets like, what are you talking about? She was like, oh, don't worry about that. So I'm like, really?
Rochelle tried to reassure Ronald that no, Dan had no idea of where they lived. However, Ronald was still infuriated. He was convinced that Dan was going to ruin their lives again.
Rochelle, this is supposed to be a fresh start for us. I can't keep doing this.
Ronald says at that point he just wanted to leave, but there was one problem.
His car wasn't working at the time.
I said, you know what? Just give me the key to your car, and I'm gonna go to Orlando and have somebody to come and get my car out here.
He said Rochelle jumped in front of him, preventing him from leaving.
And she was like talking. To be honest, she was talking. So when I get by the door and getting ready to go out, she kind of pushed the door back, and I said, why do that? And she snapped it out of me.
He said what happened next, he snapped.
In his words, he said, I hit her.
I'm not gonna lie, I hit her. I hit her.
In December of 2019, as most people are preparing for the upcoming holiday season, detectives in West Palm Beach are listening to a harrowing story from 48-year-old Ronald Gamble.
He admits that on Friday the 13th, he and Rochelle Demings got into a huge argument about her son. This was just 3 days before Rochelle's body was discovered.
With the argument becoming more and more heated, Ronald says he tried to leave.
So when I get by the door and getting ready to go out, she kind of pushed the door back, and I said, why you do that? And she slapped it out of me.
Ronald says that's when he snapped.
And I'm not gonna lie, I hit her. I hit her with my hand, and I might have hit her in her head really hard. honest with you. So after I seen her do that, she fell to the ground, like right there.
But Ronald insists she was still alive.
You see her get up?
No, sir, to be honest, because I locked the door, trying to get out of there.
He got out the door and locked it behind him and never looked back. He said he went to visit a friend in Orlando.
Did she call you at all?
Actually, to be honest with you, I turned my phone off because I'm so pissed off with what's going on with her.
So then you left to go to
Orlando.
He said he drove 2.5 hours to Orlando in Rochelle's car to stay with a friend and clear his head.
We asked him, did you hit her hard enough that you could have killed her?
You don't think you could have hit her hard enough to kill her?
Don't tell me that.
He said what he did could not have caused her death the way it happened.
Ronald insists that when he returned home after spending the weekend in Orlando, he fully expected to find his girlfriend alive and well.
By the time he returned on the 16th, he was ready to have a conversation with Rochelle.
When you came home tonight, what time did you get there?
I'm gonna say it's after 12. I don't know exactly what time it was, but it had to be after 12.
He said the door was locked.
So when you opened the door and you walk in, what happened?
Immediately, he saw Rochelle lying in a pool of blood.
I kind of freak out, but I opened the door and I was like, oh my God, you know, but I closed the door back. Because I don't know what's going. She's not moving. So I jump over her and I immediately get on the phone and call 911.
West Palm PD, what's your emergency?
Come quick, my girlfriend needs help, please.
Ronald insists the only person who could have done this to Rochelle was her son, Dan.
He has this stuff to his mom in my presence. And I would have to intervene. Man, that dude was doing so much stuff to us.
But detectives aren't buying Ronald's story, and their suspicions are further confirmed by the results of Rochelle's autopsy report.
The autopsy reveals that due to the decomposition of her body, she actually died 3 days before she was found, which was December 13th.
That was the same day that Ronald admits to hitting her.
Rochelle had 5 deep lacerations to the top of her skull. She had a contusion to her lip, severe swelling to her left eye, and fractures to the orbital bone on her left side. The fatal wound was a lateral skull fracture on the back of her skull that essentially cracked her head open.
What are the odds that on the same day Ronald admits to getting into a physical altercation with her, someone else came in and essentially beat her to death?
However, detectives aren't ready to arrest Ronald for the crime just yet.
And if I just simply made an arrest fast, without evidence, without doing DNA and phone records and what have you, that's gonna hurt us. And I didn't want to do that.
So, detectives follow up with Rochelle's son, Dan.
They let him know right away that Ronald was trying to pin the crime on him.
Mr. Gamble basically was saying he didn't do it. The only person he said is you.
Of course you, sir.
Of course he did. So I have to come up here and talk to you about that.
Dan seems frustrated and offended that police even have to investigate Ronald's claims.
Had you and your mother ever gotten into a physical altercation before?
Never.
Do you have anything to do with your mother's death?
No, sir.
Dan says the only person who could have done this is Ronald Gamble.
Dan says that his mother's relationship with Ronald was rocky from the start, and it only got worse.
This guy is like real jealous, controlling, you know, like, I just told him the devil and I meant that for a reason.
Detectives in West Palm Beach, Florida, are speaking with the son of Rochelle Demings after her boyfriend, Ronald Gamble, implicated him for her gruesome murder.
They see that he's very torn up about losing his mother. Rochelle was his best friend, and he's so hurt that he lost her.
Did you have anything to do with your mother's death?
No, sir.
Dan says he believes that Ronald Gamble was his mother's killer and that their relationship was problematic from the very beginning.
So they met off like a dating site, and it was rocky. This was before I came out. It was rocky. She had kicked him out. You know, my mom, she was a sucker for love.
Dan says Ronald tried to isolate his mother from the rest of their family.
He told my mother it was disrespectful if he talking to me while he's around. Told my mother that she think my mother's having sex with me.
Yeah, he mentioned that. I was going to ask about that. Why would he think that?
Because the way the relationship with my mother, I don't know about what he thinks of sex. But one, like I told my mother was like this. You know, that was my best friend. We was tight, you know what I'm saying?
Dan admits that he and Ronald got into some physical altercations in the past, but says Ronald was the aggressor.
Had he ever been violent with her before?
Yes.
How so? What happened?
I hit him in the head.
Rochelle!
What?
Your card keeps getting declined.
I don't know what happened.
You know how embarrassing?
He ran to the store for my mom to get her 2 bottles of wine. She didn't have enough on her card, so he felt like embarrassed, you know what I'm saying? So he talking crazy to her. I'm standing out of it for the most part.
But when Ronald started calling his mother names, Dan couldn't stay out of it any longer.
Dan saw that Mr. Gamble was just taking advantage of Miss Demings and her kind nature, and Dan would get really, really upset.
Hey! Watch how you talking to my mom like that, man. What the hell you talking to?
If y'all argue, you know what I'm saying? Don't call my mom her name or nothing that would. So he, like, tried to hit me up.
Dan says his mother moved in to defend him.
My mom came and grabbed him, like, you know, get on my son. He pushed her to the ground.
Dan said he wasn't going to sit by and watch Ronald do that to his mother, so he grabbed the closest thing, which was the hot sauce bottle.
So I hit him in the head, you know, busted his head open. And it was self-defense, though. You know, it really was. So it was just Satan, man.
Get out! Before I call the cops.
He says after that incident, he knew that he couldn't go back to his mother's house.
We got to the point where I just couldn't be there, you know what I'm saying?
But Dan continued keeping tabs on his mother, worried for her safety.
I heard them in there arguing. Because I couldn't get in, you know, I had no key. He really, like, took my arm back for real, like, ran, you know. I think she was really scared.
He was so concerned about what was happening in the home, he did the next best thing that he thought he could do.
So I punched the window. Police came that day. And I still stuck she stuff. My mom got kicked out for that. So, you know, once she got kicked out there, it was kind of my fault.
Dan admits when Ronald and his mother moved into their new condo, she didn't share the location with him, but she had good reason.
It wasn't because she was afraid of her son. It was because she was afraid of Ronald. She was trying to protect Dan until she could figure out a way to get away from Ronald for good.
So how did Dan's mail end up at the new condo?
They said, well, if you didn't know where your mother was living, why are you getting mail to her new place?
And Dan explained to them, because he was technically homeless, the mail that he was receiving at the other apartment was being forwarded to the new condo.
Did she give you a key?
I never knew where she stayed.
Detectives are inclined to believe Dan's version of events, especially when they sit down with Rochelle's other family members.
That's her heart. She loved him more than anything in this world.
You don't think he's capable of doing something like that?
I don't think he's capable of doing something like that to his mother.
Instead, they echo Dan's sentiments that Ronald Gamble is the one responsible for Rochelle's death.
She made a statement about, if anything happened to me, this MF did it.
They told police that Rochelle was in an abusive relationship. She wanted to leave Ronald, but she had to be strategic.
Rochelle had had it, and she was done with this relationship. But as she told her friends and family members, she knew she couldn't just abruptly end it and walk away.
And Rochelle's family said she had good reason to be cautious.
Ronald was threatening to make her life hell if she tried to leave him.
She just kept saying he was blackmailing her. He was trying to exploit her for money, and he just wouldn't leave.
Ronald had some dirt on her that could possibly get her fired.
She had tried marijuana to help with her chronic nerve pain.
He ended up taking a picture of her smoking marijuana and then threatened to send it to her boss at the VA hospital. She had worked for the VA for over 30 years. She loved her job and she had so much to lose.
Ronald told Rochelle that she had to pay $1,200 to keep her secret.
And I'm like, you cannot get in trouble for what he's trying to blackmail you for. He can take a video of you smoking a cigarette and say it's weed. I'm like, only thing they can do is drug test you.
But Rochelle couldn't bear the idea of losing everything she'd worked for.
So she paid him $1,200.
Rochelle wanted to end it, but she knew he had a temper, so she was trying to do it delicately and to keep the peace. And some of her friends and family members got the impression that she was terrified of him.
She said, if anything happened to me, if I come up dead, if I come up missing, he did.
And when detectives review surveillance from the evening of the murder, they feel even more confident in their case against Ronald Gamble.
We had video at the apartment complex, at least at the gates, to see what vehicles entered and exited and entered that night.
At no point does Dan or his vehicle enter the complex.
Homicide detectives in West Palm Beach investigating the mysterious death of 52-year-old Rochelle Demings believe that her live-in boyfriend, Ronald Gamble, is responsible for the crime.
Ronald tried to pin the crime on Rochelle's son, Dan, but during their investigation, police found his claims to be bogus.
Ms. Demings' son gave me his phone number, which we were able to use to see where he was on the night in question. His cell phone records show that he wasn't there.
Surveillance video from the apartment complex also proves Dan couldn't have been the person who killed his mother.
We had video at the apartment complex gates to see what vehicles exited and entered that night.
At no point does Dan or his vehicle enter the complex.
And the footage also shows Ronald leaving the complex several hours later than what he told investigators.
He left that apartment about 4 o'clock in the morning. So his version saying he was left at between 7:30 or 8 o'clock is not corroborated through the video at the front gate. He stayed there from the time of that fight until 4 o'clock in the morning, and Miss Demings is on the floor. If she's still alive, if she's dead, he remains in that house with her and never calls 911. So that was something that I felt was very damning.
There was only one person who could have done it, one person who had motive, and that was Ronald.
And now police believe they have what they need to charge him with the crime.
Ronald was arrested for second-degree murder. There's a distinction in degrees between first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter, and it all turns to intent.
I don't believe it was a first-degree murder. I don't believe that he planned to do this. I believe that maybe she did hit him and he lost his cool.
And as investigators prepare for trial, they learn Ronald had a dangerous pattern of manipulation that started long before he met Rochelle.
Detectives spoke with a friend in Orlando that Ronald claimed to stay with after the murder.
He agreed to come to the Orlando Police Department, where he provided us a statement as well. He talked about Mr. Gamble being a manipulator who always has different women in and out of his life.
As long as I've known him, he has gone from one woman to another and moved in and used them to help pay bills.
Finding out the type of person that Ronald was, he really didn't want anything to do with him.
So he was surprised when Ronald showed up at his Orlando home unannounced on the morning of December 14th.
Ronald told him that he needed help getting a one-way ticket to California.
One way?
Yep, one way.
Also, he said that Mr. Gamble got a new phone, or he saw him changing out the SIM card to his phone.
At no point did Ronald mention the fight that he had with Rochelle before he left.
So why did Ronald return to the scene of the crime instead of skipping town?
You're wondering, well, why did you come back? I guess in the end, he knew he had to come back, because where was the car? Where's your car gone? And we would have been able to track that. So he had to come back and do something. He had to come back and have some sort of explanation. And then he just wanted to minimize his involvement in it the best he could. So he's kind of like a narcissist. He wanted to talk. He wanted to tell us his story.
In September 2023, Ronald Gamble's trial for second-degree murder gets underway. Prosecutors paint a picture of a resentful and jealous man who was bitter about Rochelle's unconditional love for her son.
Ronald didn't have that kind of relationship with his mother. It seemed very foreign to him. It seems like an attack. It seems like a threat.
The prosecution asserts that when Ronald saw the letters addressed to Dan, his frustrations exploded.
With Ronald's history of having unstable relationships, being impulsive, he does have the tendency to allow jealousy to come forth and manipulate his decisions. So with the rage, finding out that you are possibly lying to me because I saw the letter, that rage takes over.
You have such ill will, hatred, and spite that you take someone's life. And that is what Ronald Gamble did.
His story of I just hit her once or twice real hard, the injuries are not consistent with somebody just hitting you twice. That's not what happened. He smashed her head into the floor, which caused her death.
But Rochelle didn't die right away.
The question you have in the back of your mind is that if he did call 911 after he struck her, could she have survived her injuries? Could she still be with us today?
When it's the defense's turn, they argue that what happened to Rochelle was a tragic accident.
Their entire strategy at trial was to lessen the impact. They said, yes, he caused her death, but it wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. He didn't intend for her to die.
And to everyone's surprise, the jury agrees.
The jury actually had mercy on him, and he ended up getting convicted with manslaughter.
Rochelle's family is crushed because the manslaughter sentence only requires 3 years. Thankfully, the judge didn't go easy on Ronald, and she sentences him to the maximum, which is 15 years for manslaughter. But since he's getting credit for time already served, he will be eligible for parole in 2035.
It's infuriating. It's not enough for this angel, for this star, this bright light to have been just blown out like that. It's not, no. 99 years still wouldn't be enough.
Domestic cases always play to your heart because how could somebody that's supposed to love you do this to you?
Women who are in domestic violence situations should never suffer in silence. My advice is to get out of the situation as soon as possible.
And don't be afraid of judgment. Judgment will get you killed. The main thing is that you're around to tell your story. And in order to do that, in some cases, you have to utter the words, "I need help."
On the morning of June 7th, 1992, the city of Springfield, Missouri, woke to a mystery that would refuse to surrender its secrets. It did not begin with a body. It did not begin with screams heard in the darkness or flashing police lights cutting through a quiet neighborhood. It began with silence. A silence so complete that it swallowed 3 women without leaving behind a single confirmed witness, a single proven suspect, or a single explanation that investigators could confidently place before the public. More than 3 decades later, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, her daughter Suzanne Streeter, and Suzanne's friend Stacy McCall remains one of America's most haunting unsolved cases. A cold case that continues to challenge every assumption detectives make about crime scenes, evidence, and human behavior. Every year, the questions return with renewed urgency. How could 3 people vanish from a suburban home almost instantly? Why was there no obvious struggle? Who entered that house during the final hours before sunrise? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, how does an entire family simply disappear? The story began as a celebration. Graduation should have marked the beginning of a new chapter for 18-year-old Suzanne Streeter and her close friend Stacy McCall. On June 6th, they joined classmates in celebrating their high school graduation. Like countless teenagers across America, they spent the evening moving from one gathering to another, taking photographs, laughing with friends, and talking excitedly about the future that stretched out before them. Nothing about those hours suggested they were living through the final ordinary night of their lives. Friends later described them as happy, energetic, and making plans for the summer ahead. The atmosphere was one of freedom and possibility. Nobody could have imagined that before sunrise, both young women would disappear forever. Suzanne lived with her mother, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, in a modest home on East Delmer Street. Friends often described Cheryl as a devoted mother who worked hard to provide for her daughter. Their relationship had experienced difficulties over the years, but by the summer of 1992, they appeared to be enjoying a stable and positive period together. The house itself sat in a quiet residential neighborhood where violent crime was not expected. It looked like the kind of place where neighbors recognized each other, where people mowed their lawns on weekends, and where children rode bicycles without fear. That ordinary setting would become one of the reasons the case shocked the nation. Evil was supposed to happen somewhere else. As graduation celebrations continued late into the evening, Suzanne and Stacy changed their plans more than once. According to investigators, they attended several parties before deciding not to spend the night where they had originally intended. Instead, sometime after approximately 2 a.m., they drove to Suzanne's home, where Cheryl was believed to be alone. It appeared to be an ordinary decision. Staying at Suzanne's house offered comfort, familiarity, and a place to rest before another day filled with graduation activities. Friends expected to see them again only a few hours later. No one believed that short drive through Springfield would become the final confirmed movement of the 2 teenagers. The timeline after their arrival becomes increasingly uncertain. Detectives believe all 3 women were inside the residence during the early morning hours of June 7th. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern American criminal investigations. There were no confirmed eyewitnesses who saw suspicious activity outside the home during the critical period. There were no emergency calls placed from inside the residence. There were no verified reports of gunshots, screams, or violent disturbances. If someone entered that house, investigators believe it happened with astonishing speed and extraordinary control. When friends arrived later that morning, expecting to meet Suzanne and Stacy, the first signs that something was terribly wrong were subtle rather than dramatic. The family vehicles remained parked outside the residence. Personal belongings that should have accompanied anyone leaving for the day appeared to have been left behind. Inside the home, the atmosphere felt strangely normal, almost frozen in time, yet deeply unsettling. Nothing immediately suggested the kind of violent confrontation usually associated with 3 simultaneous disappearances. There were no overturned tables, no shattered furniture, and no obvious bloodshed visible to casual observers. Instead, It was the absence of people that dominated every room. One detail would become famous in discussions of the case for decades. Near the front entrance lay broken glass from an exterior porch light. According to accounts gathered during the investigation, someone arriving at the residence noticed the broken globe and cleaned up the glass before realizing its possible significance. Whether that damaged light had anything to do with the disappearance has never been conclusively established. Detectives have never publicly confirmed it as decisive evidence. Nevertheless, because the original condition of the scene changed before law enforcement fully secured the residence, the incident has remained one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the investigation. As more people entered the home before police recognized the seriousness of the situation, the crime scene became increasingly compromised. Friends and relatives searched rooms, answered ringing telephones, and moved throughout the residence while trying to locate the missing women. Their intentions were innocent. At that stage, many believed Suzanne, Stacy, and Cheryl had simply stepped out unexpectedly. Yet every additional footprint, every object touched, and every minute that passed before investigators secured the house made the task of reconstructing events far more difficult. Detectives would later face the enormous challenge of separating meaningful evidence from innocent contamination. Police soon confirmed that all three women were missing. Their purses remained inside the residence. Personal items that most people would normally take when leaving home had apparently been left behind. This detail immediately distinguished the case from many ordinary missing person investigations. Experienced investigators understood that adults rarely abandon essential belongings voluntarily unless something interrupts their plans. Combined with the unexplained absence of three individuals from the same location, the evidence pointed toward circumstances far more serious than a spontaneous trip or family emergency. News spread rapidly throughout Springfield. What had begun as concern among friends evolved into a citywide search. Officers interviewed neighbors, examined nearby streets, and appealed for information from anyone who might have been awake during the early morning hours. Volunteers joined organized searches across fields, wooded areas, and abandoned properties. Tips flooded into police departments. Every reported sighting demanded investigation. Every rumor generated fresh hope before collapsing under scrutiny. Yet despite the enormous public attention, investigators failed to uncover the one breakthrough they desperately needed: a reliable witness who had seen exactly what happened during those missing hours before dawn. The mystery surrounding the Springfield Three would soon expand far beyond Missouri, capturing national headlines and becoming one of America's most enduring unsolved disappearances. With every passing day, the absence of answers only deepened the questions, leaving detectives confronted by a case that seemed to defy conventional investigative logic and setting the stage for an inquiry filled with conflicting leads, elusive suspects, and haunting possibilities that continue to echo more than 30 years later. As investigators settled into what they quickly realized would not be a routine missing person inquiry, the ordinary appearance of the Delmar Street home became one of the most unsettling features of the entire case. Experienced detectives often expect violence to leave unmistakable signatures: a broken window, overturned furniture, bloodstains, signs of forced entry, or neighbors recalling frightened screams in the middle of the night. Here, almost none of those expectations seemed to apply. The house looked as though its occupants had simply stepped outside for a few minutes and never returned. Beds appeared largely undisturbed, household items remained in place, and nothing immediately suggested that three people had been forcibly removed from the residence. Yet every hour that passed made voluntary disappearance increasingly implausible. Crime scene investigators carefully documented every room, searching for fingerprints, fibers, shoe impressions, and any physical evidence capable of revealing who had entered the home during the critical overnight hours. They photographed furniture, collected trace evidence, and attempted to reconstruct the final known movements of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Their challenge was enormous. Before officers recognized the gravity of the situation, several friends and relatives had unknowingly walked through the residence while searching for the missing women. Telephones had reportedly been answered, doors opened, and objects handled. None of these actions were malicious. but they complicated the forensic picture by introducing innocent fingerprints and footprints into an already mysterious scene. Investigators also focused intensely on establishing the victim's final confirmed timeline. Witness interviews confirmed that Suzanne and Stacy had spent the evening celebrating their high school graduation with classmates, moving between parties before deciding to spend the night at Suzanne's home. Friends remembered ordinary conversations about summer plans, college, work, and the excitement that follows graduation. No one recalled either young woman expressing fear or concern that someone might be following them. Their last confirmed public appearances reflected normal teenage behavior rather than the opening chapter of a crime that would haunt investigators for decades. Attention then turned toward Cheryl Levitt. Unlike the teenagers, she had remained at home during the evening. Detectives attempted to reconstruct her activities through telephone records, conversations with friends, and statements from relatives. They searched for evidence that she might have arranged to meet someone or expected a late-night visitor. Publicly available information has never established that she planned to leave the house before morning. If someone came to the residence after Suzanne and Stacy arrived, investigators believed all three women may have encountered that individual together. That possibility immediately raised troubling questions. Would Cheryl have willingly opened the door to someone she recognized? Or had an unexpected confrontation unfolded so quickly that none of the three women had an opportunity to escape or summon help? One of the most persistent mysteries involved the apparent lack of resistance. Three healthy individuals disappearing simultaneously presents extraordinary logistical challenges for any offender. Detectives considered numerous possibilities. An offender armed with a weapon could potentially gain immediate control through intimidation rather than physical force. Surprise might also have played a role. If the women believed the visitor posed no immediate threat, they may not have reacted until it was too late. Investigators, however, have never publicly identified evidence proving exactly how control was established inside the home. The absence of a definitive reconstruction has fueled decades of speculation while leaving law enforcement cautious about endorsing any single theory. Telephone activity also attracted significant investigative attention. As news of the disappearance spread, friends and relatives attempted repeatedly to contact the residents. Reports from the early investigation indicated that strange phone calls were received, including calls described as obscene or otherwise disturbing. Because the crime scene had not yet been fully secured when some calls were answered, investigators faced difficulty determining whether those communications were connected to the disappearance or merely unrelated nuisance calls. Law enforcement has never publicly confirmed that any anonymous caller was responsible for the crime, but the reports became one of many unsettling details that entered public discussion and remained part of the case's enduring folklore. Outside the residence, detectives expanded their search throughout Springfield and surrounding areas. Officers examined roads leading away from the neighborhood, searched wooded locations, reviewed waterways, and followed countless public tips. Every abandoned building, isolated field, and rural property capable of concealing evidence became a potential search location. Volunteers joined organized efforts while helicopters assisted in surveying difficult terrain. The operation steadily grew from a local investigation into one receiving regional and eventually national attention. Despite these extensive efforts, investigators failed to locate the missing women or discover physical evidence clearly indicating where they had been taken. Media coverage intensified almost immediately. Newspapers published photographs of Cheryl, Suzanne, and Stacy across their front pages. Television stations interrupted regular programming with updates describing the unexplained disappearance. The contrast between the smiling graduation photographs of the two teenagers and the frightening uncertainty surrounding their fate captured public attention far beyond Missouri. Communities across the country followed each new development, hoping authorities would announce a breakthrough. Instead, every passing day produced more questions than answers. As detectives interviewed hundreds of individuals, they examined the victims' personal relationships, employment histories, acquaintances, and recent interactions. Friends, classmates, neighbors, co-workers, and family members were questioned extensively. Investigators sought anyone who might have observed unusual behavior in the days leading up to June 7th, SIL 1992. They evaluated reported sightings, anonymous tips, and possible motives ranging from personal disputes to random criminal acts. Each lead required careful verification because false assumptions could divert precious investigative resources. Over time, many initially promising tips proved impossible to substantiate or were eliminated entirely. One reality became increasingly difficult for investigators to ignore. If the disappearance resulted from an abduction, the offender had demonstrated remarkable confidence and efficiency. Removing 3 victims from a residential neighborhood without generating confirmed eyewitnesses, obvious forensic evidence, or immediate alarm represented an exceptionally rare criminal event. Whether the perpetrator acted alone or received assistance remains publicly unresolved. Detectives have continued to examine both possibilities over the years while emphasizing that no theory has yet been conclusively established by the available evidence. The emotional impact on Springfield deepened with each unsuccessful search. Graduation celebrations that had filled the community only days earlier were replaced by anxiety and uncertainty. Parents looked more carefully at locked doors before going to bed. Neighbors who had once considered their streets unquestionably safe found themselves wondering whether someone capable of extraordinary violence had quietly moved among them unnoticed. The disappearance no longer belonged solely to 3 families. It had become a shared wound carried by an entire city, one that would continue to shape conversations, investigations, and unanswered questions for decades to come. As the first weeks turned into months, the investigation entered its most dangerous phase, not because detectives had stopped working, but because the flood of information threatened to bury the truth beneath thousands of possibilities. Every major unsolved case reaches a point where facts become surrounded by rumor, speculation, and false certainty. The Springfield 3 investigation reached that point with alarming speed. The disappearance had captured national attention, and with that attention came an endless stream of phone calls, anonymous letters, reported sightings, and theories that ranged from plausible to extraordinary. Detectives faced the exhausting task of separating genuine leads from mistaken observations, fabricated stories, and memories altered by time. Every tip demanded evaluation because ignoring the right one could mean losing the only opportunity to solve the case. Law enforcement established a systematic process for reviewing incoming information. Investigators traveled across Missouri and into neighboring states to interview witnesses who believed they had seen one or more of the missing women after June 7, 1992. Restaurants, gas stations, truck stops, shopping centers, and motels became the locations of reported sightings. Some witnesses expressed complete confidence that they had recognized Suzanne Streeter. Others believed they had seen Stacy McCall accompanied by unfamiliar individuals. A few even claimed all 3 women had been observed together. Each report generated hope before investigators compared timelines, examined supporting evidence, and ultimately concluded that none could be confirmed with sufficient reliability. The pattern repeated itself over and over again. Hope appeared suddenly, only to disappear under closer scrutiny. The lack of confirmed post-disappearance activity became one of the most troubling aspects of the investigation. In many long-term missing person cases, victims leave behind small traces of financial transactions, telephone calls, surveillance footage, letters, or reliable eyewitness accounts. Here, investigators found no verified evidence demonstrating that Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, or Stacy McCall remained alive after the early morning hours of June 7th. That silence became its own form of evidence, suggesting that whatever happened had likely occurred quickly and decisively. Yet without physical proof, detectives could not publicly establish exactly when or where the crime had taken place. As investigators broadened their inquiry, attention naturally turned toward individuals with criminal histories involving violence, kidnapping, or sexual offenses. Detectives examined known offenders living in and around Springfield, comparing their movements, backgrounds, and possible connections to the victims. Prison records were reviewed. Interviews were conducted with inmates who claimed to possess inside information. Anonymous informants emerged promising critical evidence in exchange for favors or reduced sentences. Such claims are common in high-profile criminal investigations, and experienced detectives approached each one with caution. While some statements appeared intriguing at first glance, none produced verifiable evidence capable of moving the investigation toward prosecution. Public fascination with the case also produced an unintended consequence. Amateur investigators began developing theories independent of law enforcement, connecting unrelated events and identifying supposed suspects based on coincidence rather than evidence. Rumors spread through neighborhoods, workplaces, and eventually across national media. Innocent individuals found themselves discussed publicly despite the absence of credible evidence linking them to the disappearance. The detectives repeatedly reminded the public that speculation could damage lives while distracting attention from legitimate investigative work. Even decades later, law enforcement has continued to emphasize that many popular theories circulating online remain unsupported by verified facts. Investigators also revisited the victim's final known movements with extraordinary detail. They reconstructed the graduation celebrations minute by minute, interviewing classmates repeatedly to ensure that no overlooked observation remained hidden within earlier statements. Memory, however, is an imperfect instrument. As weeks became months, recollections naturally faded. Small differences emerged between witness accounts regarding arrival times, conversations, and departures from various parties. Such inconsistencies did not necessarily indicate deception. They reflected the normal limitations of human memory. Nevertheless, every discrepancy required careful examination because even a seemingly insignificant detail could alter investigators' understanding of the final hours before the disappearance. The neighborhood itself remained under scrutiny. Detectives canvassed residents multiple times, asking whether anyone had noticed unfamiliar vehicles, suspicious individuals, or unusual sounds during the overnight hours. Some neighbors reported hearing ordinary traffic. Others remembered dogs barking. A few recalled seeing vehicles, but could not provide descriptions detailed enough for investigators to identify them years later. No single witness emerged with the kind of observation capable of transforming the investigation. The offender, if operating within the neighborhood that night, appeared to have blended into the darkness with remarkable success. As public interest intensified, investigators found themselves balancing transparency with investigative necessity. Certain pieces of evidence were intentionally withheld from public release in hopes that future suspects might reveal knowledge only the perpetrator could possess. This strategy, common in homicide and missing person investigations, inevitably fueled speculation that police possessed secret evidence pointing toward a particular individual. Law enforcement has consistently maintained that while important investigative information remains confidential, no publicly identified suspect has been charged because prosecutors require evidence capable of meeting the high standard demanded in criminal court. Years passed, but the families refused to surrender hope. Every anniversary revived memories of unanswered questions and renewed appeals for information. Age-progressed images were created to illustrate how Suzanne and Stacy might appear if still alive. Investigators continued reviewing files, re-examining evidence with advancing forensic technology, and following newly submitted tips regardless of how much time had elapsed. Cold cases often depend upon unexpected developments. A witness deciding to speak after years of silence, advances in DNA analysis, or a suspect making a revealing statement long after believing the danger of prosecution has disappeared. Those possibilities kept the Springfield 3 investigation active, despite the extraordinary passage of time. Yet, beneath every new lead lay the same haunting reality. 3 women had entered a quiet Springfield home during the early hours of June 7, 1992. By sunrise, they were gone. No confirmed ransom demand followed. No verified communication from the missing women ever surfaced. No proven crime scene beyond the residence was identified. No remains have been publicly recovered. The absence of definitive answers transformed the disappearance from a local criminal investigation into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history, a case where every theory seems possible until confronted with the stubborn lack of evidence, and where the silence left behind inside a modest house on East Delmar Street continues to echo louder than any explanation investigators have yet been able to provide. As the investigation stretched beyond its first year, detectives confronted a reality familiar to every major cold case. The passage of time was becoming both an enemy and an opportunity. Memories faded, witnesses relocated, physical evidence aged, and countless investigative avenues gradually narrowed. Yet history had shown that some of the most significant breakthroughs in criminal investigations occur years or even decades after the crime itself. Someone burdened by guilt might finally speak. A relationship could collapse, prompting a former confidant to reveal long-hidden information. Advances in forensic science might expose evidence once considered impossible to recover. For investigators assigned to the Springfield 3 case, abandoning the search was never an option. Instead, the file grew thicker with every passing year, becoming one of the largest and most meticulously documented investigations in Missouri history. Detectives repeatedly returned to the house on East Delmar Street, mentally reconstructing the final hours before dawn. They questioned whether the offender had arrived expecting to encounter only one person and unexpectedly found three. They considered whether the victims had recognized the individual at the door, allowing entry without suspicion. They explored the possibility that the offender had carefully planned the crime, studying the home's layout and the routines of its occupants beforehand. None of these theories could be confirmed through publicly available evidence, but each reflected the unusual characteristics of the disappearance. Removing three individuals from a residence without leaving behind a clearly identifiable crime scene suggested planning, control, and a willingness to take extraordinary risks. Among the many questions investigators revisited was whether the perpetrator acted alone. Controlling three adults at the same time presents significant practical challenges. A single offender armed with a firearm could potentially force compliance through intimidation, but transporting multiple victims without attracting attention would require remarkable confidence and precision. The possibility of more than one offender therefore remained part of investigative discussions. Law enforcement, however, has never publicly identified evidence conclusively establishing either scenario. Without definitive forensic proof or reliable eyewitness testimony, detectives remain careful not to transform investigative possibilities into factual conclusions. Numerous persons of interest surfaced over the years, some identified through public speculation and others examined privately by investigators. Certain individuals attracted attention because of prior criminal histories or reported behavior. Others became subjects of rumor simply because they lived nearby or had indirect connections to the victims. Law enforcement interviewed many of these individuals, compared statements, examined alibis where possible, and pursued available evidence. In several instances, investigators publicly stated that evidence was insufficient to support criminal charges. The distinction between a person of interest, a suspect, and a person formally charged became increasingly important as public fascination with the case continued to generate accusations unsupported by verified facts. The emergence of the Internet transformed the Springfield 3 investigation in unexpected ways. Decades after the disappearance, discussion forums, independent researchers, podcasts, documentaries, and online communities devoted thousands of hours to analyzing every known detail. Old newspaper articles were digitized. Archived television interviews resurfaced. Maps, timelines, and witness statements were reconstructed by amateur investigators determined to solve the mystery themselves. Some contributions proved valuable by preserving historical information that might otherwise have been forgotten. Others unintentionally spread misinformation by repeating rumors as though they were established facts. Detectives frequently found themselves responding to renewed public interest whenever an old theory unexpectedly gained popularity online. Throughout the years, investigators emphasized that physical evidence remained under careful preservation. Advances in forensic science repeatedly encouraged law enforcement agencies across the United States to reopen difficult cold cases. DNA analysis, fingerprint comparison technologies, and digital investigative techniques have solved crimes once believed impossible to resolve. Although authorities have never publicly announced a breakthrough comparable to those achieved in some other famous cold cases, The Springfield 3 investigation has benefited from periodic reviews using improved forensic methods. Detectives have consistently maintained that evidence collected in 1992 continues to be evaluated whenever new technology becomes available. The emotional cost of the investigation extended far beyond law enforcement. Families carried decades of uncertainty without the closure that accompanies confirmed answers. Birthdays passed. Holidays arrived and ended. Generations grew older while photographs of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remained permanently frozen in the summer of 1992. Unlike families able to mourn after a confirmed death, they lived within a painful space between hope and acceptance. Every telephone call carried the possibility of long-awaited news. Every major investigative announcement raised expectations that the mystery might finally end. Time did not lessen those emotions. It merely changed the way they were carried. For the Springfield community, the disappearance became part of its collective memory. Residents who had been children in 1992 grew into adults hearing the story repeated by parents, teachers, journalists, and investigators. The house itself became inseparable from the mystery. Even after ownership changed and years passed, its address continued to evoke one of the most baffling unsolved disappearances in American history. Visitors occasionally drove past, not searching for sensationalism, but attempting to understand how such an extraordinary crime could unfold within an ordinary suburban neighborhood. The simplicity of the setting only deepened the unease. Nothing about the street suggested it should have become the center of a mystery spanning more than 3 decades. Investigators have repeatedly appealed to one possibility that remains constant despite the passage of time. Someone knows more than they have shared. That individual may not have witnessed the crime directly. They may have overheard a conversation, noticed unexplained behavior, remembered an unusual statement, or observed changes in someone close to them during the days following June 7, SIL, 1992. Information dismissed as insignificant decades ago could acquire entirely new meaning when combined with evidence already known to detectives. This principle has helped solve numerous cold cases across the United States, reminding investigators that breakthroughs often emerge not from dramatic discoveries, but from ordinary people deciding, after many years, that silence has lasted long enough. Today, despite exhaustive investigative work, one truth remains beyond dispute. The disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall continues to defy simple explanation. The unanswered questions that first confronted detectives in the summer of 1992 remain remarkably similar decades later. Who entered the house during those early morning hours? How were 3 women removed without leaving behind a clear trail? Where were they taken? And why has the person responsible, if still alive, managed to avoid accountability for so long? Until credible evidence answers those questions, the Springfield 3 will remain not only one of Missouri's most enduring cold cases, but also one of the most haunting mysteries in modern American criminal history. A case whose silence continues to speak louder than any theory ever proposed. By the time the investigation entered its second decade, the Springfield 3 case had evolved into something few detectives ever hoped to confront, a mystery so complex that nearly every original lead had been explored. Yet none had produced the evidence necessary to explain what happened during those critical hours before sunrise on June 7, SIL, 1992. Entire teams of investigators had rotated through the case. Detectives retired, new officers inherited thousands of pages of reports, and every fresh assignment began with the same daunting realization. Somewhere inside an enormous archive of interviews, photographs, forensic reports, maps, and evidence logs might be the overlooked detail capable of changing everything. Cold cases are rarely solved by chance alone. More often, they are solved because investigators are willing to question assumptions that have survived for years. Case reviews became increasingly methodical. Experienced detectives approached the investigation as though it had occurred only days earlier, refusing to assume that earlier conclusions were beyond reconsideration. Witness statements were reread alongside newly created timelines. Evidence inventories were checked against original collection records. Investigators searched for inconsistencies, unexplored relationships, and investigative opportunities that may have been limited by the technology available in 1992. This process was painstaking rather than dramatic. It involved thousands of hours spent comparing documents, verifying facts, and ensuring that every conclusion remained supported by evidence rather than habit. One question repeatedly resurfaced during these reviews. Had investigators correctly identified the significance of every item inside the house? Crime scenes often reveal their meaning only after detectives understand the sequence of events. An object that appears ordinary during the first examination may become critically important once placed within a broader timeline. Conversely, evidence that initially seems suspicious may later prove entirely unrelated. Because the Springfield 3 residence had been entered by friends and relatives before police fully secured it, reconstructing the original condition of the home remained exceptionally difficult. Detectives therefore exercised considerable caution when evaluating physical evidence, recognizing that innocent activity after the disappearance complicated later interpretations. The vehicles parked outside the residence also continued to attract attention. Investigators publicly acknowledged that the family cars remained at the home, suggesting the missing women had not voluntarily departed together using their own transportation. This fact strengthened the possibility that another vehicle had been involved, whether driven by the offender or someone accompanying them. Detectives examined reports of suspicious automobiles observed in the neighborhood during the relevant time period. Over the years, various witnesses described unfamiliar vans, sedans, and pickup trucks. Unfortunately, many descriptions lacked sufficient detail to identify a specific vehicle or establish a reliable connection to the disappearance. As memories faded, those observations became increasingly difficult to verify. Law enforcement also revisited the victims' personal lives with the understanding that relationships often reveal motives overlooked during initial investigations. Friends, acquaintances, co-workers, and extended family members were interviewed more than once across the years. Detectives sought evidence of unresolved conflicts, threats, financial disputes, or individuals displaying unusual interest in the victims before their disappearance. Publicly available information has never established a definitive motive linking any specific person to the crime. Instead, investigators were left confronting multiple possibilities, each supported by fragments of information, but none capable of forming a complete evidentiary picture. Advances in forensic science continued offering cautious optimism. Across the United States, cold cases from the 1970s and 1980s were being solved through technologies unimaginable when those crimes originally occurred. Improved DNA analysis, digital fingerprint comparison systems, and enhanced laboratory techniques transformed investigations that had once appeared impossible. Every such breakthrough generated renewed hope among the families of the Springfield 3. If science could identify offenders decades after murders in other states, perhaps the same advances might eventually unlock answers hidden within evidence preserved since 1992. Authorities have repeatedly indicated that available evidence remains subject to review as forensic capabilities continue to improve, though they have not publicly announced results identifying a perpetrator. Public interest never truly disappeared. Every anniversary prompted renewed media coverage, documentaries revisited the case, and investigative journalists returned to Springfield hoping fresh reporting might inspire new witnesses to come forward. The mystery appealed not only because 3 women vanished without explanation, but because the case seemed to violate ordinary expectations about crime. Most offenders leave behind mistakes. Most disappearances generate at least one decisive clue. Here, the absence of certainty became the defining characteristic of the investigation. Every unanswered question encouraged another theory, and every theory ultimately collided with the same obstacle. The available evidence simply did not support a definitive conclusion. Investigators frequently reminded the public of an essential principle often overlooked in high-profile cases. The goal was never to identify the most interesting suspect or the most popular theory. The objective was to identify the individual responsible through evidence capable of surviving scrutiny in a court of law. Suspicion alone does not secure convictions. Rumors repeated often enough do not become facts. Detectives, therefore, remained committed to following evidence rather than public opinion. even when doing so meant rejecting theories that attracted widespread attention. Behind the investigative process lay an emotional reality impossible to measure in reports or evidence logs. For the families, uncertainty became a permanent companion. There were no confirmed final moments to remember, no graves to visit, no courtroom testimony explaining why the crime had occurred. Instead, there remained only photographs, unanswered questions, and the hope that someone, somewhere, still possessed information capable of ending decades of silence. Every year that passed without resolution increased the likelihood that witnesses would die, memories would disappear, and opportunities would be lost forever. Yet history had demonstrated that even the oldest cold cases sometimes yield to persistence. That possibility continues to define the Springfield 3 investigation today. Detectives may not yet know exactly what happened inside the house on East Delmar Street during the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. But they remain convinced that the truth did not simply vanish alongside Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Someone witnessed something unusual. Someone heard words that seemed insignificant at the time. Someone has lived for decades carrying knowledge they have never shared with investigators. Until that silence is broken or until new evidence finally reveals what has remained hidden for more than 30 years, the disappearance of the Springfield 3 will continue to stand as one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, reminding investigators and the public alike that some of the darkest chapters in criminal history are not defined by what is known, but by everything that remains missing. The years continued to pass, but the Springfield 3 investigation never truly became inactive. Instead, it entered the long, painstaking existence familiar to only the most enduring cold cases, a state where progress is measured not by arrests or dramatic discoveries, but by the relentless pursuit of even the smallest new fact. Every detective assigned to the file understood that solving a decades-old disappearance often depends on a single overlooked detail, a forgotten conversation, or a witness who finally decides that the weight of silence has become unbearable. Cases once believed impossible have been solved after 40 or 50 years because someone, somewhere, chose to speak. That possibility remained the foundation of every renewed review of the Springfield 3. Investigators continued examining the evidence through the lens of advancing forensic science. Throughout the United States, technological breakthroughs repeatedly transformed dormant investigations into active prosecutions. Biological material that once yielded no useful information became capable of producing DNA profiles. Fingerprints previously considered too faint could be enhanced through improved imaging techniques. Digital databases allowed investigators to compare evidence across jurisdictions more efficiently than ever before. While authorities have not publicly announced forensic evidence identifying the person responsible for the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall, they have consistently maintained that preserved evidence remains available for future testing as scientific capabilities evolve. The case also benefited from renewed cooperation between agencies. Cold cases rarely remain confined to the department that first investigated them. State investigators, federal agencies, forensic specialists, criminal analysts, and prosecutors periodically revisit major unsolved crimes, bringing fresh perspectives that may challenge long-standing assumptions. Such collaboration does not guarantee answers, but it reduces the risk that valuable evidence will remain overlooked simply because investigators become accustomed to viewing the case through the same perspective year after year. In the Springfield 3 investigation, every comprehensive review sought not only to verify earlier conclusions, but also to question whether entirely different interpretations deserved consideration. One enduring mystery involved the offender's apparent confidence. If the disappearance resulted from a planned abduction, the individual responsible demonstrated remarkable control over both the victims and the surrounding environment. The crime appears to have unfolded during hours when neighbors were asleep, traffic was minimal, and opportunities for eyewitness observation were limited. Yet, even under favorable conditions, removing 3 people from a residential neighborhood without generating confirmed witnesses represented an extraordinary risk. Detectives have repeatedly acknowledged that the logistics of the crime remain among its most perplexing features. Whether the offender relied upon deception, intimidation, familiarity with the victims, or some combination of those factors has never been publicly established. Another factor contributing to the mystery is the complete absence of confirmed communication from the missing women after their disappearance. Investigators found no verified evidence that Cheryl, Suzanne, or Stacy contacted friends, relatives, employers, or financial institutions after the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. There were no authenticated letters, telephone calls, or financial transactions demonstrating that any of the three voluntarily disappeared to begin new lives elsewhere. While investigators remained open to every reasonable possibility during the early stages of the inquiry, the continued absence of any confirmed activity increasingly reinforced the belief that the disappearance resulted from criminal conduct rather than voluntary absence. Public interest has ensured that the case remains part of America's broader conversation about unsolved disappearances. Television documentaries, newspaper retrospectives, podcasts, and investigative programs have periodically returned to Springfield, presenting the known facts to new generations. This sustained attention has served two important purposes. First, it has preserved public awareness of the victims rather than allowing their disappearance to fade into obscurity. Second, it has generated new tips from individuals who may have hesitated to contact authorities years earlier. Detectives have consistently encouraged such information, emphasizing that even details appearing insignificant today may complement evidence already contained within the investigative file. At the same time, investigators have urged caution regarding speculation. The popularity of the case has produced countless theories assigning responsibility to various individuals, often based on coincidence, rumor, or incomplete information. While public discussion reflects genuine interest in solving the mystery, law enforcement has repeatedly emphasized that criminal investigations depend upon verifiable evidence rather than persuasive narratives. A compelling theory is not a substitute for proof. Detectives continue to distinguish carefully between investigative possibilities and conclusions supported by admissible evidence, recognizing that preserving the integrity of the investigation remains essential should prosecutable evidence eventually emerge. For the families, however, the passage of time has never reduced the emotional burden. Birthdays continue to arrive without celebration. Family milestones pass with empty places that can never truly be filled. New generations know Cheryl, Suzanne, and Stacy only through photographs and stories shared by relatives determined to preserve their memory. Unlike cases resolved through arrests and court proceedings, the Springfield 3 investigation has denied those closest to the victims the certainty necessary for complete mourning. Instead, they have lived with a unique form of grief defined by unanswered questions rather than confirmed conclusions. Investigators often describe cold cases as conversations interrupted rather than ended. Evidence remains. Witnesses remain. The truth remains. What changes is the amount of effort required to reconnect those fragments into a complete narrative. The Springfield 3 investigation reflects that principle more clearly than almost any other American disappearance. Every document preserved, every interview recorded, every item of physical evidence stored under controlled conditions represents another opportunity for future investigators to uncover relationships that earlier generations could not detect. Scientific progress has repeatedly demonstrated that evidence once considered insignificant may become decisive decades later. More than 30 years after that quiet June morning, the house on East Delmar Street no longer serves as an active crime scene, yet it remains one of the most recognizable locations in the history of American cold cases. Its ordinary appearance continues to challenge the imagination. 3 women entered the home expecting nothing more extraordinary than a few hours of sleep after graduation celebrations. By daylight, they had vanished without a verified trace. The simplicity of that fact has never become easier to understand. It has only become more haunting with time. Today, investigators continue to express a belief shared by many who have worked the case over the decades. Someone still possesses information capable of advancing the investigation. It may be a memory long dismissed as unimportant. It may involve an unusual statement overheard years ago, unexplained behavior following the disappearance, or knowledge intentionally concealed out of fear, loyalty, or guilt. History has shown that silence rarely lasts forever. Until that silence is finally broken, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall will remain one of the nation's most enduring unsolved mysteries, a case defined not only by the three lives that disappeared in the darkness, but by the enduring determination of investigators, families, and an entire community to ensure that, despite the passing decades, they are never forgotten. More than 3 decades have now passed since that summer morning in Springfield, yet investigators continue to approach the case with the same fundamental question that confronted the first officers who walked through the front door of the Delmar Street residence. What happened inside that house between the moment the 3 women settled in for the night and the moment the outside world realized they were gone? Every new generation of detectives inherits the same photographs, the same witness interviews, the same forensic reports, and the same unanswered questions. Unlike many criminal investigations, where time gradually reveals hidden truths, the Springfield 3 case has remained remarkably resistant to certainty. Every promising lead has eventually reached the same frustrating destination, a lack of evidence sufficient to establish exactly what occurred. One of the greatest challenges in any long-running investigation is resisting the temptation to fill gaps with assumptions. Detectives are trained to distinguish between facts, probabilities, and speculation, a discipline that becomes increasingly difficult as public interest grows. Over the years, countless theories have attempted to explain the disappearance. Some suggest the women encountered someone they knew and trusted. Others argue the offender may have carefully selected the residence after observing the victims during graduation celebrations. Still others speculate about an opportunistic criminal acting without prior connection to the family. While each possibility has been discussed publicly, investigators have never confirmed any single explanation through verifiable evidence. The distinction remains essential. A theory may sound convincing, but only evidence can transform possibility into fact. The extraordinary nature of the disappearance has often invited comparisons with other famous unsolved American mysteries. Yet investigators emphasize that the Springfield 3 case possesses characteristics that make direct comparisons difficult. In many missing person investigations, search teams eventually locate a vehicle, clothing, personal belongings, or human remains. Even when an offender initially escapes detection, physical evidence often provides a path toward eventual identification. Here, the absence of those discoveries has become the defining characteristic of the investigation. Detectives have spent decades searching not only for the person responsible, but also for the victims themselves, hoping that one confirmed discovery might answer questions that have lingered since 1992. As forensic science continues advancing, the preservation of evidence remains critically important. Across the United States, previously unsolved cases have demonstrated the value of retaining physical evidence even when contemporary technology appears exhausted. DNA analysis has become dramatically more sensitive than it was in the early 1990s, while improvements in trace evidence examination, fingerprint comparison, and digital investigative methods continue expanding the possibilities available to cold case investigators. Authorities have not publicly disclosed every item retained from the Springfield 3 investigation, nor have they announced forensic results identifying a suspect. Nevertheless, they have repeatedly affirmed that preserved evidence continues to be evaluated whenever meaningful technological advances occur. The case has also become a reminder of how investigative procedures have evolved over time. In 1992, the first individuals entering the house had no reason to believe they were unknowingly walking through what would become one of America's most significant unsolved crime scenes. Friends answered telephones, searched bedrooms, and moved through the residence while attempting to locate the missing women. Today, investigators frequently reference the case when discussing the importance of securing potential crime scenes immediately, even when circumstances initially appear ambiguous. The actions taken that morning were understandable given the information available at the time, but they also illustrate how quickly valuable forensic context can be altered before law enforcement fully recognizes the seriousness of a situation. Beyond its investigative significance, The Springfield 3 disappearance has profoundly influenced the Springfield community itself. Residents who remember June 1992 often describe the case as a dividing line between two eras. Before the disappearance, many viewed their neighborhoods as places largely insulated from extraordinary violence. Afterward, perceptions changed. Families became more cautious. Conversations about personal safety grew more frequent. Parents who had once allowed teenagers considerable independence began reconsidering routines that previously seemed harmless. Although Springfield has continued to grow and change over the decades, the memory of the disappearance remains deeply woven into the city's identity. The families have carried perhaps the greatest burden of all. In criminal cases resulting in prosecution, courtroom testimony often provides a detailed reconstruction of events, allowing loved ones to understand at least part of what happened. In this case, that opportunity has never arrived. There has been no confession presented before a jury, no definitive forensic reconstruction, and no judicial finding establishing responsibility. Instead, relatives have lived with uncertainty measured not in months or years, but in decades. Hope and grief have existed side by side, each refusing to completely replace the other. That emotional reality distinguishes unresolved disappearances from nearly every other category of violent crime. Investigators remain convinced that the passage of time does not necessarily protect those responsible. History has repeatedly demonstrated that offenders sometimes reveal themselves years later through unexpected circumstances. Relationships change. Loyalties dissolve. Witnesses reconsider earlier decisions to remain silent. Scientific advances expose evidence previously considered insignificant. Even casual conversations may acquire entirely new meaning when viewed alongside information unavailable at the time they occurred. These possibilities continue motivating detectives assigned to cold cases across the country, including the Springfield 3 investigation. Every anniversary serves not only as a remembrance of the victims, but also as another opportunity to encourage individuals with knowledge to come forward. Despite decades of public attention, one principle has remained constant throughout the investigation. Law enforcement has consistently prioritized evidence over speculation. Popular theories have come and gone. Various names have periodically attracted public suspicion before fading under closer examination. Detectives have repeatedly emphasized that solving the case requires more than identifying someone who appears suspicious. It requires evidence capable of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard, though demanding, protects both the integrity of the investigation and the pursuit of justice for Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Today, the Springfield 3 case endures not because investigators have stopped searching for answers, but because the mystery has resisted every conventional path toward resolution. Somewhere within the events of that quiet June night lies an explanation that has remained hidden for more than 30 years. Whether that truth emerges through new forensic discoveries, previously unknown witnesses, or evidence still waiting to be recognized, the determination to uncover it has never disappeared. Until that day arrives, the story of the Springfield 3 will continue to stand as one of America's most haunting unsolved disappearances. A reminder that some mysteries are measured not by the number of theories they inspire, but by the extraordinary silence they leave behind. With each passing anniversary, the Springfield 3 case has taken on a rare status in American criminal history. It is no longer remembered only as a local tragedy or a missing person investigation. It has become a benchmark against which investigators measure other unsolved disappearances. A reminder that even in an era of sophisticated forensic science, some crimes remain stubbornly beyond explanation. New detectives assigned to the case often begin where every investigator before them began, by attempting to see the evidence with fresh eyes, free from decades of assumptions. That process is not about rewriting history. It is about asking whether a detail overlooked in 1992 might carry a different meaning today. Cold case investigators frequently describe their work as assembling a puzzle with missing pieces, except no one knows how many pieces were lost. In the first place, the Springfield 3 investigation reflects that challenge perfectly. Detectives possess witness interviews, photographs, physical evidence, timelines, and thousands of pages of reports. Yet they still lack the single element capable of connecting every fragment into one coherent narrative. The unanswered questions remain remarkably consistent after more than 30 years. Who approached the house that night? What sequence of events unfolded inside? How were 3 women removed without triggering a confirmed emergency call or attracting reliable eyewitnesses? Those questions continue to define the investigation because none has received a definitive answer supported by publicly available evidence. One characteristic has consistently distinguished the case from many other long-term investigations: the apparent absence of a confirmed destination. Search teams have examined countless locations over the decades, responding to tips involving wooded areas, abandoned properties, bodies of water, rural farmland, and construction sites. Every significant lead required careful evaluation. Some generated extensive searches involving specialized equipment and trained personnel. Others ended after investigators determined that the information could not be verified. Despite these persistent efforts, no publicly confirmed discovery has revealed where Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall were ultimately taken. That absence continues to frustrate investigators because locating a secondary crime scene often provides the physical evidence necessary to identify an offender. Advances in public awareness have also altered the way cold cases are investigated. In 1992, information traveled primarily through newspapers, television broadcasts, and telephone tip lines. Today, digital media allows law enforcement to reach millions of people within hours. Archived interviews, photographs, and appeals for information remain permanently accessible rather than disappearing after a single news cycle. This expanded reach has generated renewed interest in the Springfield 3 case from individuals who were not even born when the disappearance occurred. Detectives recognize that someone who dismissed an observation decades ago may encounter renewed media coverage and realize its significance only years later. Investigators have repeatedly encouraged members of the public to reconsider memories that once appeared insignificant. A vehicle parked unusually late in the neighborhood, a conversation that seemed harmless at the time, an acquaintance displaying unexpected anxiety after the disappearance became public. Criminal investigations are often solved not because dramatic new evidence suddenly appears, but because existing information is viewed within an entirely different context. A single statement, when combined with preserved forensic evidence or another witness account, can transform an ordinary recollection into a critical investigative lead. That possibility continues to guide law enforcement's public appeals. Throughout the investigation, authorities have remained careful to avoid overstating conclusions. This restraint sometimes frustrates observers seeking definitive answers, yet it reflects one of the most important principles in criminal justice. Investigators must distinguish between information they suspect and information they can prove. Public confidence in an investigative theory does not reduce the burden required for criminal prosecution. If the Springfield 3 case is ever solved, it will be because evidence, not speculation, establishes responsibility. That commitment has shaped every official review conducted over the past 3 decades. For the families, however, legal standards offer little comfort against the daily reality of uncertainty. They have endured the unique pain of living without confirmed answers, unable to celebrate reunions, yet equally unable to experience the finality that accompanies a resolved homicide investigation. Every major holiday, every family gathering, and every milestone serves as another reminder of those who should have been present. Time has changed the faces of surviving relatives, but photographs of Cheryl, Suzanne, and Stacy remain forever fixed in the early summer of 1992. The contrast between passing decades and permanently preserved memories illustrates one of the deepest emotional wounds left by unresolved disappearances. The Springfield community has likewise refused to forget. Memorial events, media retrospectives, and continued investigative updates ensure that the 3 women remain more than names in an aging police file. Their disappearance continues to influence conversations about neighborhood safety, investigative persistence, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior, no matter how insignificant it may initially appear. Younger generations who never witnessed the original search efforts have inherited the story through documentaries, newspaper archives, and conversations with residents who remember the shock that spread across the city that June morning. Investigators often remind the public that the age of a case does not determine its solvability. Across the United States, numerous cold cases have reached successful conclusions after decades of apparent silence. Some were solved because forensic technology advanced beyond what investigators once believed possible. Others ended when reluctant witnesses finally chose to cooperate. Still others unraveled after offenders made incriminating statements they assumed could never be verified. These examples reinforce a simple but powerful truth. Time can weaken evidence, but it can also create opportunities unavailable during the original investigation. That reality continues to sustain hope in the Springfield 3 case. Somewhere, whether preserved within physical evidence, hidden inside an overlooked witness statement, or carried silently by someone who has never spoken publicly, the truth still exists. Investigators remain committed to finding it, not because the passage of decades has diminished the importance of the crime, but because justice does not expire with time. Until credible evidence finally reveals what happened during those final hours inside the house on East Delmar Street, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall will remain one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries, a case defined by extraordinary silence, relentless investigation, and the enduring hope that even after more than 30 years, the final chapter has yet to be written. As the decades have unfolded, the Springfield 3 investigation has become more than a search for 3 missing women. It has become a study in the limits of criminal investigation itself. Detectives are trained to believe that every crime leaves a trace, that every offender makes a mistake, and that every sequence of events can eventually be reconstructed through evidence. Yet this case continues to challenge those principles. The disappearance appears to have unfolded with extraordinary precision, leaving investigators with remarkably little that can be conclusively linked to a specific offender. That absence has forced law enforcement to rely not on dramatic discoveries, but on patience, persistence, and the belief that the smallest overlooked detail may ultimately become the most important. Cold case units reviewing the investigation have often approached it as though beginning from the very first day, rather than assuming earlier conclusions were unquestionably correct. They have systematically re-examined witness interviews, physical evidence, timelines, and investigative decisions. This process is neither glamorous nor fast. Detectives compare statements line by line, looking for inconsistencies, unexplored relationships, or details that may have seemed insignificant when originally recorded. Human memory changes over time, but written records preserve the exact words spoken decades earlier. Sometimes a sentence ignored during the initial investigation gains entirely new significance when viewed alongside evidence developed years later. The importance of preserving investigative integrity cannot be overstated. Throughout the years, numerous rumors have circulated regarding alleged confessions, anonymous informants, hidden evidence, and supposed eyewitnesses. Some stories have been repeated so frequently that they are occasionally mistaken for established fact. Law enforcement has consistently urged caution, emphasizing that many widely discussed claims remain unverified or have been investigated without producing evidence sufficient to support prosecution. The distinction between rumor and evidence is critical. High-profile cold cases naturally generate speculation, but successful investigations depend upon facts capable of surviving judicial scrutiny rather than public popularity. One enduring feature of the Springfield 3 case is its complete lack of confirmed closure. Unlike many disappearances eventually resolved through the discovery of remains, investigators have never publicly identified a location definitively connected to the victims after they vanished from the Delmar Street residence. Extensive searches have been conducted over the years in response to tips from the public, including searches of rural properties, wooded areas, and other locations suggested through investigative leads. While these efforts demonstrate law enforcement's continued commitment, none has publicly produced definitive evidence establishing where the 3 women were taken or what ultimately happened to them. Advances in forensic science continue offering cautious optimism. Modern investigative techniques have repeatedly transformed decades-old evidence into powerful courtroom testimony. DNA technology, forensic genealogy, Enhanced fingerprint analysis and sophisticated digital comparison systems have solved cases once considered impossible. Investigators assigned to the Springfield 3 file understand that scientific progress often arrives unexpectedly. Evidence collected in 1992 may reveal information tomorrow that could not have been extracted 30 years earlier. For that reason, preserving physical evidence under appropriate conditions remains one of the most important responsibilities in any unresolved investigation. The case has also influenced law enforcement training. Investigators frequently reference the disappearance when discussing the importance of early crime scene preservation, witness management, and rapid coordination between responding officers. The circumstances surrounding the initial discovery illustrate how innocent actions taken before authorities fully recognize a criminal event can unintentionally complicate later forensic analysis. Friends entering the residence had every reason to believe they were searching for loved ones who had briefly stepped away. Only afterward did it become apparent that the house might represent the last confirmed location of 3 women who would never be seen again. That painful lesson continues informing investigative procedures across countless jurisdictions. For the families, however, procedural improvements cannot erase decades of unanswered questions. Every passing year deepens the contrast between ordinary life continuing around them and the moment time effectively stopped inside the Delmar Street home. Children have grown into adults. Parents have become grandparents. Entire generations have emerged since the disappearance, yet the photographs displayed in news reports remain unchanged. Cheryl Levitt is forever 47 years old. Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall remain forever 18. Their graduation celebrations permanently frozen in history only hours before everything changed. The Springfield community continues carrying that memory as well. Residents who remember the original investigation often describe the atmosphere of uncertainty that settled across the city during those first weeks. Neighborhood conversations shifted from graduation parties to search efforts, police interviews, and the growing realization that something deeply unsettling had occurred. Even today, newcomers quickly learn why the address on East Delmar Street occupies such a significant place in local history. It represents not only an unsolved crime, but also the lingering reminder that extraordinary mysteries can emerge from the most ordinary surroundings. Investigators maintain a belief shared by nearly everyone who has worked the case. The truth has not disappeared simply because it remains undiscovered. Someone, somewhere, possesses knowledge that has never reached the official investigation. That information may appear insignificant in isolation, a remark made decades ago, unusual behavior following the disappearance, or an observation dismissed at the time because it seemed unrelated. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that cold cases are often solved when seemingly ordinary details intersect with preserved evidence or newly developed forensic techniques. The challenge lies not in proving that such information exists, but in finding the individual willing to share it. More than 30 years after 3 women vanished from a quiet Springfield neighborhood, the investigation continues to stand as one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. It is a case defined not by dramatic courtroom revelations or definitive forensic breakthroughs, but by the remarkable persistence of investigators who refuse to accept silence as the final answer. Until evidence finally identifies what happened during those final hours of June 7, SIL 1992, the Springfield 3 will remain a haunting reminder that some crimes resist explanation, not because the truth has been lost forever, but because it continues waiting, hidden somewhere beyond the reach of every search conducted so far, yet never beyond the determination of those committed to finding it. More than 30 years after the disappearance, one fact remains unchanged despite every technological advancement and every investigative review. The Springfield 3 case is still open. The files have never been sealed away as forgotten history, nor have investigators accepted that the mystery is unsolvable. Instead, the case exists in a unique space between past and present, where every anniversary serves both as a memorial and as a renewed appeal for information. The detectives assigned to the investigation understand that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. Across the United States, cold cases, once considered impossible, have reached successful conclusions after decades of silence. That history continues to shape the determination surrounding Springfield. Every comprehensive review begins with the same chronology. Graduation celebrations conclude during the late hours of June 6, SIL 1992. Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall decide to spend the remainder of the night at Suzanne's home rather than their previously discussed destination. They arrive at the residence on East Delmar Street, where Cheryl Levitt is believed to be present. During the hours before sunrise, something occurs inside or around that home. By the following morning, all three women have disappeared. Their vehicles remain parked outside. Personal belongings are left behind. No verified communication follows. No confirmed witness observes the disappearance itself. Those basic facts have never changed, and every investigative theory must ultimately account for each of them. One of the reasons the case continues to attract investigators is its extraordinary level of apparent planning or, at least, extraordinary efficiency. Whether the offender acted with careful preparation or simply exploited unexpected circumstances remains unknown. What investigators do know is that the disappearance generated remarkably little immediately identifiable forensic evidence pointing toward a specific individual. Cases involving multiple victims frequently produce witnesses, surveillance opportunities, abandoned property, or other investigative pathways. In Springfield, those conventional routes largely failed to produce definitive answers. The mystery lies not only in the victim's disappearance, but also in the offender's apparent ability to leave so few verifiable traces. Law enforcement has consistently emphasized that preserving evidence remains a central priority. Every advancement in forensic science raises the possibility that previously inconclusive material could someday reveal critical information. Scientific progress has repeatedly transformed investigations once believed exhausted. Techniques unavailable in 1992 now allow laboratories to recover information from evidence that earlier generations of investigators could not fully analyze. Although authorities have not announced a breakthrough identifying the individual responsible for the Springfield 3 disappearance, they continue maintaining preserved evidence in anticipation of future technological developments capable of extracting additional investigative value. The role of public cooperation has likewise remained essential throughout the investigation. Detectives have repeatedly encouraged anyone possessing information, even details they consider minor, to contact law enforcement. Cold cases often hinge upon seemingly ordinary observations that acquire significance only after being combined with evidence already known to investigators. A vehicle remembered years later, a conversation previously dismissed as meaningless, a change in someone's behavior following widespread media coverage. Criminal investigations rarely progress through a single dramatic revelation. More often, they advance because multiple small facts eventually align to reveal a larger truth. At the same time, investigators have worked carefully to protect the integrity of the case against misinformation. The Springfield 3 disappearance has generated countless books, documentaries, podcasts, online discussions, and independent investigations. While many have helped preserve public awareness, others have unintentionally blurred the distinction between documented facts and unsupported speculation. Detectives have repeatedly reminded the public that not every widely circulated story reflects verified investigative findings. Rumors may attract attention, but evidence remains the foundation upon which every prosecutable case must ultimately rest. The emotional consequences of the investigation extend far beyond the official case file. Families have endured decades without certainty, existing between hope and grief in a way few people can fully understand. They have watched birthdays, graduations, weddings, and holidays arrive without the presence of loved ones whose fate remains unknown. In many homicide investigations, a conviction offers at least a measure of explanation. Here, explanation itself has remained absent. That continuing uncertainty has become one of the deepest tragedies associated with the Springfield 3 case. For investigators, the disappearance also serves as a reminder of the patience required in cold case work. Solving crimes separated from the present by decades demands persistence rather than speed. Witnesses must be re-interviewed. Evidence must be retested. Historical records require continual verification. New investigative techniques must be evaluated against old evidence without allowing optimism to replace objectivity. The process often unfolds over years, sometimes producing no visible progress before suddenly revealing a connection overlooked by every previous review. That possibility continues motivating those assigned to the investigation despite the extraordinary passage of time. The city of Springfield has changed significantly since the summer of 1992. Neighborhoods have expanded. Businesses have opened and closed. New families have moved into communities that once participated in search efforts for the missing women. Yet the story of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains woven into the city's collective memory. Residents continue recognizing their names not because the mystery has been solved, but because it has endured. Every renewed media report reminds the community that unanswered questions from decades earlier still await resolution. History has demonstrated that even the most baffling investigations can eventually reach a turning point. Advances in forensic genealogy have solved murders once considered permanently unsolvable. Long silent witnesses have stepped forward after carrying secrets for decades. Offenders have confessed unexpectedly late in life. These examples do not guarantee that the Springfield 3 case will follow the same path, but they reinforce an important principle embraced by cold case investigators everywhere. Time changes evidence, relationships, technology, and human decisions. The future may present opportunities unavailable to detectives in 1992. Until that day arrives, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of the most haunting, unresolved mysteries in American criminal history. It is a case that continues to challenge investigators, inspire public interest, and remind the nation that some of the most difficult crimes are defined not by what investigators know, but by what remains hidden. Somewhere beyond decades of unanswered questions lies the truth about what happened during those final hours inside the quiet home on East Elmer Street. The search for that truth continues not because it is easy, but because the passage of time has never diminished the obligation to pursue justice for 3 women who vanished without leaving behind the answers their families, their community, and investigators have sought for more than a generation. As the investigation entered its 4th decade, the Springfield 3 case stood as a powerful reminder that some mysteries endure not because investigators stop searching, but because the evidence refuses to reveal its full story. Every major development in forensic science prompted detectives to reopen boxes of preserved evidence, reread interview transcripts, and compared decades-old information against modern investigative methods. Cold case work is built on the belief that evidence does not lose its value simply because years have passed. A fingerprint overlooked in one era may become identifiable in another. A witness who remains silent out of fear may eventually decide that the truth matters more than the burden of secrecy. Investigators assigned to the Springfield 3 case have repeatedly embraced that philosophy, understanding that persistence is often the only advantage time provides. One of the defining characteristics of the investigation has been the careful distinction between confirmed facts and unanswered questions. Detectives know with confidence that Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall disappeared during the early hours of June 7, 1992. They know the women never arrived at the activities friends expected them to attend later that day. They know their vehicles remained at the residence, along with personal belongings that would normally accompany anyone leaving home voluntarily. Beyond those established facts, however, the investigation enters territory where possibilities exist without definitive proof. Law enforcement has consistently resisted the temptation to present speculation as certainty, recognizing that preserving credibility is essential if the case is ever to reach prosecution. The mystery surrounding motive remains equally unresolved. Public discussion has produced countless explanations over the years, ranging from crimes committed by someone familiar with the victims to offenses carried out by an unknown opportunistic offender. Detectives have examined numerous possibilities while following available evidence wherever it led. Yet no publicly available information has conclusively established why the women disappeared or identified a motive supported by sufficient evidence for criminal charges. In many solved cases, motive becomes clear only after the offender has been identified. Until that critical step occurs, investigators remain cautious about assigning purpose to actions that have never been fully reconstructed. Technology has dramatically altered the investigative landscape since 1992. Modern databases allow agencies across the country to compare information more efficiently than ever before. Digital record systems enable detectives to analyze historical reports with greater speed and accuracy. Geographic mapping software assists investigators in identifying patterns that earlier generations might have overlooked. Advances in forensic biology continue expanding the amount of information recoverable from preserved evidence. While authorities have not publicly disclosed every technique applied to the Springfield 3 investigation, they have repeatedly emphasized that the case remains subject to ongoing review as new scientific capabilities emerge. Another significant development over the decades has been the growing recognition of the importance of multidisciplinary cold case investigations. Modern reviews often involve experienced homicide detectives working alongside forensic scientists, criminal analysts, prosecutors, behavioral specialists, and evidence technicians. Each discipline contributes a different perspective, reducing the likelihood that valuable information will remain hidden simply because it falls outside one investigator's expertise. The Springfield 3 case has benefited from this evolving approach, reflecting broader changes in how American law enforcement addresses long unsolved disappearances. Media attention has remained remarkably consistent throughout the years. Every major anniversary brings renewed newspaper articles, television features, documentaries, and podcast episodes examining the disappearance from fresh perspectives. While such coverage cannot replace evidence, it serves an important investigative function by keeping the case visible. Someone who ignored earlier appeals may encounter new reporting and reconsider information they previously believed insignificant. Detectives have repeatedly acknowledged that sustained public awareness increases the possibility that useful witnesses will eventually come forward. At the same time, investigators have warned against allowing public fascination to distort historical accuracy. The longer a case remains unsolved, the greater the opportunity for myths to develop alongside documented facts. Stories repeated frequently can gradually acquire an appearance of credibility despite lacking evidentiary support. Law enforcement has therefore continued emphasizing the importance of relying upon verified investigative findings rather than unsupported rumors circulating through books, internet forums, or social media discussions. Maintaining that distinction protects both the integrity of the investigation and the possibility of future prosecution. For surviving relatives, however, the investigation has always represented something more personal than a criminal file. Every year that passes reinforces the painful absence left by 3 women who never returned home. Families have continued living their lives while carrying unanswered questions that no amount of time has erased. Birthdays are remembered through photographs. Milestones arrive accompanied by thoughts of those who should have shared them. Unlike many criminal cases where court proceedings eventually provide an account of what occurred, the Springfield 3 investigation has denied loved ones the certainty that accompanies even the most difficult truths. Investigators often speak about cold cases as promises rather than memories. A promise that evidence will continue to be preserved. A promise that new information will be examined regardless of how many years have passed. A promise that victims will not be forgotten simply because public attention shifts elsewhere. The Springfield 3 case reflects that commitment more clearly than almost any other American disappearance. Every detective inheriting the investigation also inherits a responsibility to continue asking difficult questions, challenging old assumptions, and remaining open to new evidence wherever it may appear. More than 30 years after Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall vanished, one reality remains undeniable. The case continues to resist explanation, but it has never escaped determination. Somewhere, the complete sequence of events still exists, preserved in evidence not yet fully understood, in memories not yet fully shared, or in knowledge carried silently by someone who has never spoken publicly. History repeatedly demonstrates that truth can remain hidden for decades before emerging unexpectedly. Until that moment arrives, The Springfield 3 investigation will continue standing as one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries, a case defined not only by 3 lives interrupted without explanation, but by an unwavering commitment to ensure that the search for answers never comes to an end. By now, the Springfield 3 investigation has outlived careers, generations, and nearly every expectation investigators once held about how long a missing person case could remain unresolved. Detectives who answered the first calls in June 1992 have long since retired. Some are no longer alive. Their reports, handwritten notes, photographs, and recorded interviews have become part of an investigative legacy inherited by officers who were children or not yet born when Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall disappeared. Yet despite the changing faces behind the badges, the mission has remained exactly the same. Identify what happened during those final hours and, if possible, hold the person or persons responsible accountable under the law. Cold case investigations are unlike active crime scenes. They demand extraordinary discipline because investigators must resist seeing patterns that are not supported by evidence. Every review begins with the verified facts rather than the most popular theories. The women disappeared during the early morning hours of June 7th, SIL, 1992. Their vehicles remained outside the residence. Personal belongings were left behind. Friends became concerned when the women failed to appear for planned activities later that day. Officers responded. Searches expanded. Thousands of tips followed. Beyond those established events, detectives have spent decades attempting to bridge an evidentiary gap that has never been fully closed. One reason the case continues attracting national attention is the remarkable absence of certainty. Criminal investigations usually move toward one of several conclusions: an arrest, the discovery of remains, a verified suspect, or evidence demonstrating that an initial theory was incorrect. The Springfield 3 investigation has reached none of those destinations publicly. Instead, it exists in a rare category where investigators possess enough evidence to believe a serious crime occurred, yet not enough to reconstruct the crime itself with confidence. That distinction has transformed the disappearance into one of the most studied unsolved cases in modern American history. Advances in forensic science continue offering cautious hope. Across the United States, investigators have solved cases dating back half a century using methods unavailable when those crimes were committed. DNA sequencing has become dramatically more sensitive. Digital evidence management systems allow agencies to compare information across jurisdictions with unprecedented efficiency. Analytical software can identify investigative connections that earlier detectives might never have recognized. Every technological breakthrough encourages another review of preserved evidence, another opportunity to ask whether materials collected in 1992 contain information that science can finally unlock. Law enforcement has repeatedly emphasized that preserving evidence is itself an act of optimism. Evidence retained carefully today may become decisive tomorrow. Throughout the history of criminal investigation, scientific progress has repeatedly demonstrated that conclusions once considered impossible can eventually become routine. Detectives responsible for the Springfield 3 file understand this better than most. Although no publicly announced forensic breakthrough has identified the offender, they continue maintaining the investigation with the expectation that future developments may succeed where earlier efforts could not. Public cooperation remains equally important. Detectives frequently remind citizens that memories sometimes acquire meaning only after years of reflection. Someone who dismissed an unusual conversation, an unfamiliar vehicle, or unexpected behavior in 1992 may recognize its significance decades later after learning additional facts through renewed media coverage. Many famous cold cases have advanced because ordinary individuals finally decided that information carried quietly for years deserved to be shared. Investigators therefore continue encouraging anyone with relevant knowledge, no matter how insignificant it may appear, to contact law enforcement rather than assume someone else has already done so. The Springfield 3 case has also become a lasting lesson in investigative humility. Detectives acknowledge that no investigation is perfect. Decisions are made using the information available at the time, often under extraordinary pressure. Procedures have evolved considerably since 1992, influenced in part by cases demonstrating how quickly evidence can be altered before authorities recognize the full significance of a disappearance. Modern investigators study historical cases not to criticize earlier efforts, but to understand how future investigations can better preserve evidence, protect crime scenes, and coordinate large-scale searches during the critical first hours after a disappearance. For the families, however, the passage of time has brought neither certainty nor closure. They have spent decades living with questions that remain unanswered despite thousands of investigative hours. The absence of definitive knowledge creates a unique form of grief, one that resists the ordinary process of mourning because the final chapter has never been written. Hope survives alongside sorrow, even after more than 30 years. Every major anniversary revives public attention, but for relatives, the disappearance has never been confined to anniversaries. It has remained part of everyday life. The city of Springfield continues carrying that memory as well. Residents who remember the original investigation often describe the shock that spread through neighborhoods as search efforts intensified and days turned into weeks without results. New generations have inherited the story through local history, documentaries, newspapers, and conversations with family members who experienced the uncertainty firsthand. The names Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall have become inseparable from one of Missouri's greatest unsolved mysteries, ensuring that the victims themselves are never reduced to mere statistics within a police archive. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Springfield 3 investigation is not simply that it remains unsolved, but that investigators have refused to surrender to that reality. Every review of preserved evidence reflects a belief that answers still exist. Every appeal for information reflects confidence that someone may yet possess the missing piece. Every advancement in forensic science renews the possibility that evidence collected decades ago could reveal something previously invisible. That persistence defines modern cold case work. Justice delayed is difficult, but investigators know history has repeatedly shown it is not impossible. Today, more than 3 decades after 3 women vanished from a quiet home on East Delmar Street, the mystery remains as compelling as it was on the morning the disappearance was first discovered. The questions have never changed. Who entered the house? What happened before sunrise? Where were the victims taken? Why has no one been held accountable? Until credible evidence finally answers those questions, the Springfield 3 case will remain one of America's most enduring unsolved disappearances, a haunting reminder that some investigations are measured not by the speed of their resolution, but by the determination of those who continue searching long after the rest of the world has moved on. As another year passes and another anniversary arrives, the Springfield 3 case continues to occupy a place unlike almost any other investigation in American criminal history. It is no longer remembered solely because 3 women vanished without explanation. It endures because, despite decades of investigation, enormous public attention, and remarkable advances in forensic science, the central mystery remains unresolved. For every detective who has inherited the file, the unanswered questions have become both a professional challenge and a solemn responsibility. Somewhere within the thousands of pages of reports, preserved evidence, witness interviews, and forensic examinations lies a truth that has yet to reveal itself. The task has never changed. Find that truth without compromising the evidence required to prove it. Cold case investigators often describe unresolved disappearances as conversations interrupted in the middle of a sentence. Every witness statement offers part of the story, but not the ending. Every photograph captures a moment, but not what followed. Every item collected from a crime scene preserves a fragment of history without explaining how it fits into the larger picture. The Springfield 3 investigation reflects this reality with unusual clarity. Detectives know where the story begins. They know who the victims were. They understand the final confirmed movements leading to the house on East Delmar Street. Beyond that point, however, certainty gives way to unanswered questions that have resisted explanation for more than 3 decades. Investigative reviews have continued because experience teaches an important lesson. Evidence itself does not become weaker with age if it has been properly preserved. Human memory may fade, but physical evidence can acquire new significance as science advances. Across the United States, numerous cold cases have been solved after investigators revisited old evidence using technologies unavailable when the crimes originally occurred. Fingerprints once considered unusable have produced identifications. Tiny biological samples have yielded DNA profiles decades later. Digital analysis has uncovered investigative connections hidden within historical records. Every such breakthrough reminds detectives working the Springfield 3 case that patience is not passive, it is an active commitment to ensuring that opportunities created by future science are never lost. Law enforcement has also emphasized the importance of continued public awareness. Unlike many investigations that disappear from headlines after a few months, the Springfield 3 case has remained part of documentaries, newspaper retrospectives, podcasts, and academic discussions concerning unsolved crime. This visibility serves a practical purpose. Someone who was reluctant to speak years ago may now feel differently. Relationships change. Circumstances evolve. Individuals who once feared consequences may eventually decide that revealing the truth matters more than protecting old secrets. Detectives have repeatedly stated that no piece of information is automatically too small or too old to deserve examination. At the same time, investigators have remained careful to separate legitimate inquiry from speculation. The mystery has inspired countless theories over the decades, many presented with confidence despite lacking supporting evidence. Some have focused on individuals never charged with any offense. Others rely upon assumptions unsupported by verified investigative findings. Law enforcement has consistently reminded the public that solving the case requires evidence capable of surviving the scrutiny of a courtroom rather than simply convincing public opinion. That distinction has guided every official review of the investigation and remains essential if the case is ever to reach a successful prosecution. For the families, however, the legal standards governing criminal investigations offer little relief from the emotional burden carried since June 1992. They have lived through decades marked not by answers, but by uncertainty. Every family milestone has arrived accompanied by the absence of loved ones who should have been present. Every anniversary has revived memories of unanswered telephone calls, unsuccessful searches, and the hope that tomorrow might finally bring long-awaited news. Unlike families whose loved ones are recovered and whose cases proceed through the justice system, they have endured the unique pain of never learning with certainty what happened during those final hours. The Springfield community has likewise demonstrated extraordinary resilience in preserving the memory of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Their names remain familiar, not because residents have become accustomed to the mystery, but because they have refused to allow it to fade into history. Journalists continue revisiting the case. Investigators continue reviewing evidence. Community members continue sharing information whenever renewed appeals are issued. The passage of time has not erased the disappearance from local memory. Instead, it has transformed the case into a lasting reminder of the importance of vigilance, cooperation, and perseverance. Perhaps the most significant lesson offered by the Springfield 3 investigation is that justice is not measured solely by speed. Many of the most celebrated cold case resolutions in American history occurred only after decades of apparent silence. Investigators understand that the absence of immediate progress does not necessarily indicate permanent failure. Science evolves, records improve, witnesses reconsider earlier decisions, circumstances change in ways impossible to predict. Every cold case detective knows that today's unanswered question may become tomorrow's solved mystery through persistence rather than luck. That belief continues sustaining the investigation. Somewhere, whether preserved within physical evidence awaiting future analysis or held quietly in the memory of someone who has never spoken publicly, the explanation still exists. The disappearance itself has never ceased being real simply because the answers remain hidden. Investigators continue preserving evidence, reviewing reports, following credible leads, and encouraging anyone with relevant information to come forward, because history repeatedly demonstrates that truth often survives long after silence appears. Permanent. More than 30 years have passed since Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall vanished from a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri. Yet their story remains unfinished. The files remain open. The evidence remains preserved. The questions remain unanswered. Until reliable evidence finally reveals what happened before dawn on June 7, 1992. The Springfield 3 case will continue standing among America's most enduring unsolved mysteries, not merely because 3 women disappeared, but because an entire community, generations of investigators, and families who have never stopped hoping continue refusing to accept that the search for the truth should ever come to an end. More than 3 decades have passed since the morning that forever changed Springfield, Missouri, yet the story of the Springfield 3 remains suspended between history and hope. Time has transformed neighborhoods, advanced science beyond what investigators in 1992 could have imagined, and introduced entirely new generations to one of America's most enduring unsolved disappearances. But one thing has never changed. Somewhere, the truth still exists. Whether preserved within physical evidence waiting for future technology, hidden inside a memory someone has never shared, or carried by an individual who has remained silent for decades, the events of that June morning did not simply vanish. They happened. They left traces. The challenge has always been finding the one piece capable of connecting everything else. For investigators, the Springfield 3 case represents more than an unsolved file resting inside a police archive. It represents an ongoing obligation. Every detective assigned to the investigation inherits thousands of pages documenting years of interviews, forensic examinations, search operations, and investigative reviews. Each generation studies the work of those before them, not to repeat it blindly, but to ask whether new technology, fresh perspective, or overlooked evidence might finally reveal what earlier investigators could not. Cold case investigations are built upon the understanding that justice does not expire. An unanswered question remains unanswered regardless of how much time has passed. Throughout American criminal history, some of the most remarkable investigative breakthroughs have emerged only after decades of apparent silence. Offenders have been identified through scientific techniques unavailable when crimes were committed. Witnesses have chosen to speak after carrying secrets for much of their lives. Small inconsistencies overlooked during the original investigation have become the foundation of successful prosecutions years later. Those examples do not guarantee that every cold case will eventually be solved, but they reinforce the principle that perseverance often matters as much as technology. The Springfield 3 investigation continues under that same belief. For the families, however, hope has always existed alongside unimaginable uncertainty. They have lived through birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and family milestones without knowing what truly happened to Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Unlike cases that conclude with courtroom testimony or recovered evidence providing definitive answers, this investigation has left loved ones waiting through decades of unanswered questions. That uncertainty has become its own lasting wound. It is impossible to fully mourn what has never been completely explained, and impossible to stop wondering whether tomorrow may finally bring the answers denied for so many years. The Springfield community has carried that burden as well. Residents continue remembering the summer of 1992, not simply because of the disappearance itself, but because of the profound sense of vulnerability it created. A quiet residential neighborhood became the setting for one of the nation's most baffling mysteries. The ordinary appearance of the house on East Delmar Street has always intensified the unease surrounding the case. There was nothing extraordinary about the location. Nothing suggested it would become known across the United States. That ordinary setting remains one of the most haunting aspects of the investigation, reminding people that extraordinary crimes do not always announce themselves with obvious warning. Law enforcement agencies have repeatedly emphasized one message throughout the life of the investigation. The case remains open. Detectives continue accepting and evaluating new information. Preserved evidence remains available for future scientific examination. Credible tips continue receiving attention regardless of how many years have passed. This commitment reflects an understanding shared across modern policing. Time may complicate investigations, but it does not erase responsibility. Every unresolved case represents not only a crime awaiting explanation, but also a promise that investigators will continue searching until every reasonable opportunity has been exhausted. The Springfield 3 case has also become an enduring lesson in investigative patience. It demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence, documenting witness statements thoroughly, and resisting the temptation to embrace theories unsupported by verifiable facts. It reminds investigators that speculation, no matter how persuasive, can never replace evidence capable of standing before a court of law. Throughout decades of public fascination, law enforcement has consistently returned to the same principle. The objective is not merely to explain the mystery, but to establish the truth through evidence strong enough to achieve justice. Today, the names Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall continue to resonate because they represent far more than an unsolved investigation. They symbolize every family still waiting for answers, every detective who refuses to abandon an impossible case, and every community determined that victims will not be forgotten simply because years continue to pass. Their disappearance remains one of America's defining cold cases precisely because it has resisted every conventional explanation while continuing to inspire extraordinary determination among those seeking the truth. Perhaps somewhere, someone reading or hearing this story recognizes a detail long dismissed as unimportant. Perhaps an old memory, an unexpected conversation, or a forgotten observation still holds meaning that no one realized at the time. History has repeatedly shown that cold cases sometimes change because ordinary people decide the moment for silence has finally ended. Investigators have never stopped believing that possibility exists in the Springfield 3 case. Until the day reliable evidence finally answers the questions that began before sunrise on June 7, SIL 1992, the disappearance of the Springfield 3 will remain one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. 3 women entered a quiet home expecting an ordinary night after a graduation celebration. By morning, they had vanished without a confirmed trace. More than 30 years later, investigators still search, families still hope, and a community still remembers. The mystery endures not because the truth has disappeared, but because it has not yet been found. And somewhere beyond decades of silence, hidden within evidence, memory, or conscience, the final answer is still waiting to be discovered.